والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وبعد, to continue inshallah, and we've reached الباب الثاني كيفية الأعمال الظاهرة, the second chapter of the book of the Salah in Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala's Ihya. So in this section, we're going to look at the way in which the prayer is offered. So he says, كيفية الأعمال الظاهرة. So the way in which the apparent or the outer actions of the salah are performed. And why is it that he's specifying the outer actions? Because this part of the book is focusing on the inner actions of the salah, the tahara, etc., and focusing on areas that are not normally focused on by the fuqaha, etc. So before we start, we spoke last week about the importance of the salah, and we spoke about iqamat al-salah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks in the Quran to us about iqamat al-salah, and the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the first pillar after the shahadatain is the iqamat al-salah, and iqamat al-salah means establishment of the prayer, means to pray but consistently, to make our life revolve around the prayer, not to make prayer revolve around our life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, inna salata tanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkar, that prayer prohibits a person, protects a person from al-fahsha wal munkar, illicit behavior and sin. And I believe we spoke about, if we didn't, then we will anyway, the importance of the prayer in prevention of al-fahsha wal munkar, sin and illicit behavior. The first thing a person usually drops when they take the road of sinning, major sin, and losing themselves to sin, etc., perversion of the soul, and so on and so forth, the first thing that goes is the prayer. It's the prayer. The prayer is the most important part of the deen. And if I start to see myself slacking in prayer, alarm bells should be ringing. If I find myself lazy in my prayer, that should set off alarm bells. I should realize, okay, the issue has become serious now. My situation now requires critical attention. And the Prophet ﷺ, when speaking about the best of ibadat, he said, as-salatu ala waqtiha, prayer in its due time. And the salah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not benefit from our prayer. As we mentioned before, the Imam can be replaced. Those that pray in the front row can be replaced. Those that pray in the last row can be replaced. Everyone is replaceable in the prayer. The prayer does not need us. The masjid doesn't need us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need us. We need the prayer. We need the masjid. We need the halaqat that we attend. We need the Quran that we recite. We should see it as medicine for our souls. Just as we nourish our bodies with food, we have to nourish our souls with salah, with ilm, etc. And from experience, and from the experience of those that have authored, etc., you will find a person that falls into perversion of his or herself, a person who falls into sin, the first thing that they drop. And when I say sin, I mean major sin, where major sin becomes a normal part of their life. The first thing they lose is the salah. And so salah has to be the most important part of my life. Nothing should come before prayer. Nothing should come before prayer. Money should not come before prayer. Family should not come before prayer. Even health should not come before prayer. Of course, there are times where we are excused. We are excused at times if a person loses consciousness, if a person is going into the operating theater, things like that. But I should not put money before my prayer. I should look for a job which allows me to pray. I shouldn't say, okay, well, I need the money. I'm going to settle with this job, and I'll find another job at another time, etc. and become lax. No, prayer is more important than money, and men should realize the importance of having wives that pray, and women should know the importance of having husbands that pray. If a woman has a man that is struggling financially, but he takes his prayer seriously, that's perhaps more valuable than the financial aspect. To have a husband who is invested in the deen is more important than to have a husband who can provide the best of material lives. Likewise, to have a woman invested in the deen is more important than having a woman who is invested in material aspects of life, beautification and looks and so on and so forth. It's not to say that those things are not important. Of course, they're important. But the deen is the most important thing, the most important thing. Why? Because the reality of this life is that it's temporary and the next life is permanent. And if you live together as poor people, but you're praying every single day, reciting Quran, engaged in dhikr, raising children that love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the akhirah, bi'idhnillah, you'll be wealthy, even though you are poor in this life. But if you live together and you're wealthy but not praying, in the akhirah, you'll be poor. So there's no benefit in the world. And of course, the challenge is to strike the balance. It's not to say that dunya is not important, etc. But the deen is the most important aspect. Likewise, in a job position, if I have a job opportunity where I can pray, and I have another job opportunity where I'm not able to pray, but I will earn more money, that which allows me to pray is more important. The prayer is essential, and we have to understand how important the prayer is. The prayer is extremely important. So he says, كيفية الأعمال الظاهرة. So Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, he's going to discuss in this chapter how to pray, i.e. the fiqh of salah. And of course, Imam al-Ghazali, he was a product of the Shafi'i school of fiqh. So he followed the great Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala wa radiya an. And he authored many books in Shafi'i fiqh. He authored books in Usul al-Fiqh, his famous one being al-Mustasfa, and he authored books in the Shafi'i framework of fiqh. So for example, al-Basit, al-Wasit and al-Wajiz. And if I'm not mistaken, al-Wasit was the book that was summarized and abridged and became al-Minhaj of Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, which is studied today. It's the main go-to book of the Shafi'i school. If you master al-Minhaj, then you're a master of the Shafi'i madhab in brief. And so Imam al-Ghazali, he is a cornerstone of the Shafi'i madhab. You cannot be a Shafi'i today except that you are indebted to Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. Likewise, you cannot study Usul al-Fiqh today except that you are indebted to Imam al-Ghazali. Likewise, you cannot study Tazkiyah. You cannot read books on purification of the soul today except that you are indebted to Imam al-Ghazali. And I would even go so far as to say that Western psychology is also indebted to Imam al-Ghazali. Many of the concepts of early scholars of psychology, etc., they would have taken these concepts from Imam al-Ghazali in one way or another. And the Western world was introduced to much of spirituality, which later kind of branched out into elements of psychology through Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. Many Christian scholars studied the books of Imam al-Ghazali and translated the books of Imam al-Ghazali. So he says, ينبغي للمصلي, he says al-qiyamu, so he's going to now speak about standing in the prayer. He says ينبغي للمصلي إذا فرغ من الوضوء والطهارة وستر العورة أن ينتصب قائما متوجها إلى القبلة. So he says the first thing, once a person has completed their purification, they've now performed wudu or ghusl if it's obligatory upon them, and they have covered their awrah, that it's now for this person to stand up straight. So in saying that, he's telling us that a prerequisite for the salah is number one, the wudu, number two, satrul awrah. And he's not going to go into the details of satrul awrah here, but there's a general kind of agreement amongst the fuqaha, the awrah of the man, so the nakedness that needs to be covered for the man in prayer is from the navel area to the knees. That's the necessity, the bare necessity. If you only have one piece of cloth and you can't cover any part of your body except for one part, then you have to cover from the navel to the knees. And for the woman, her entire body is considered awrah. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the woman as an awrah. She is beautiful in and of herself. And that's a fact that we have to remind ourselves of. Because of the confusion today, they're trying to make it out as if men and women are the same, etc. They're not the same. Men are attracted to women in ways that women are not attracted to men. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the woman in her entirety beautiful. Therefore, her entire body is considered to be awrah. The man's entire body is not considered to be beautiful. You wouldn't describe a man as being beautiful. A man doesn't walk outside in the street and everyone's stunned and looking at the man. But a woman, she walks outside, and most men, if she dresses herself up, will be stunned. Most men, only those who have trained themselves not to look, won't look. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He says, وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, some of the ulama, they say that the da'af here, that man has been created weak, the da'af, the weakness here, is referring to man's weakness for women, that you will find. And some earlier Western scholars perhaps, they used to say that the woman is the door to the man that the devil cannot touch. That the woman is the door to the man that the devil cannot touch. That a man will not be tempted by fame, by wealth, by status, etc. But a beautiful woman will tempt him. And it's important we recognize that. We have to recognize our weakness to women, and for women to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them inherent beauty. And it's a woman's responsibility to cover herself properly. It's a woman's responsibility. Why? Because Allah has made her attractive. And it's our responsibility to look away. And so if a woman is not dressed correctly, it doesn't mean the man can start looking at her and blaming her. No. The woman, yeah, she has to dress properly, but likewise, the man has to control his desire and control his gaze. And likewise, today it could even be argued that, men have become as attractive as women in some way due to the hypersexualized society that we live in, wherein, men are packaged in a way which tempts the clothes that they're made to wear and the media programming, etc. And just as for women, it's important to dress modestly and moderately, etc. Likewise, the man. It's not befitting for a man to walk outside and he has a tight tank top on, or he's wearing jeans that are showing his thighs and things like that. It's not acceptable, nor is it respectable. It's not respectable for a man. And a man has to dress in a dignified way. Likewise, a woman. And we spoke about our presentation in a previous chapter. And this is a part of presentation, dressing in a respectful and dignified manner. And wearing tight clothes that reveal our body shapes is not respectable. It's not respectable and it's not dignified. And so it's something that we shouldn't accept. And previously, it was common sense. It was known. Amongst Muslims, it was known. Muslims shouldn't be wearing tight clothes. But now, due to the desensitization that has happened, because it's become the norms in fashion, men go outside wearing leggings. And it's not considered strange. Men wear leggings. Like that. That should be, when a man wears leggings, other men should be looking at the man stunned. Like, what on earth is happening here? But that's not the case anymore. Now we become desensitized. So just as a woman has to cover herself properly, a man has to too. But a man has not been created attractive in the way that a woman has. And that's a fact. And those who try to deny it, they're lying to themselves. Those who try to deny that they're not attracted to women, they don't find women to be a temptation, etc. They are lying to themselves. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created man in that way and has created women in that way. And so you have to know your weakness. Otherwise, shaitan will come to you and you won't realize he's coming to you from that particular door. So the awrah for the man from the navel to the knees, and for the woman, the entire body. And there's a difference of opinion about the feet. Are the feet of the woman considered to be awrah or not, i.e. in the salah? Are they considered to be awrah in the salah? The face is not considered to be awrah and the hands are not considered to be awrah in the salah. And some of the fuqaha, such as the ahnaf, they'll say that the feet are not considered to be awrah in the salah, although there's a different opinion within the Hanafi madhab that suggests their feet are awrah. And when we say the hands and the face are not considered to be awrah, it doesn't mean that a man is allowed to gaze at a woman's face. It's not awrah from the sense that she doesn't have to cover her face, but it's awrah from the sense that a man is not allowed to look unless there is a reason. Unless you have a reason to look at a woman's face, you shouldn't be looking. It shouldn't be looking. If we talk about attraction, the most attractive part of a person is what? Their face. The face is what leads you to look at other parts. So we can't pretend that, the face isn't attractive. And no, you have to lower your gaze. And if you have to look at the woman, you should lower your gaze, i.e. your gaze of desire. Lower your gaze of desire. So when you're looking at a woman, you're not looking at a woman with a lustful eye and a desirous eye. And again, it's about being dignified and respectful. And the best way to address this issue for both men and women is, how would I like my daughter or my mother or my sister to be treated? Then treat women in the same manner. And for women, how would I like my son or my father or my brother to be treated? And treat men in the same manner. Likewise in marriage. treat my wife the way I would like my daughters to be treated. Treat the husband the way I would like my sons to be treated, etc. So the face and the hands, they're not from awra in the salah, and they're not considered by many of the fuqaha to be awra outside of the salah, in the sense you have to cover them, but we're not allowed to look unless it's necessary. Then he says, or unless there's a need, because there's a difference between necessity and need. There's a difference between darura and haja. So if there's a need which isn't a necessity, then you can look. For example, the need of trading, the need of teaching, the need of learning, the need of seeking a cure for sickness, and so on and so forth. Then he says, so once the person has performed the wudu and they have covered themselves adequately for the prayer, and the fuqaha generally they say a person should cover themselves with 3 or 4 garments for the salah. So it's the necessity is the awra, but it doesn't mean that a man can pray with 3/4 length trousers on, bare, topped, etc. No, you have to cover yourself properly. Likewise, women. And it's important when praying that you don't wear something which is see-through. For some, they might wear a piece of cloth which is see-through. Like you can see the color of the skin beneath the clothing. That's problematic as well. It has to be something which is adequate. It adequately covers one's body. As for example, in the summer, there are certain types of clothing we might wear which are light. They're not necessarily see-through, but they're very light. So we have to make sure we're covered properly. Then he says, مُتَوَجِّهٍ إِلَى الْقِبْلَةِ. So then the person has to stand facing the qibla. So that's the third condition that he's mentioning, facing the qibla. So in order for the salah to be correct, you have to have tahara, you have to cover your awra properly, and you have to face the qibla. If you don't have tahara, your salah is not valid. If you're not covered adequately, your salah is not valid. If you're not facing the qibla, your salah is not valid. But in each of those, there are exceptions. If, for example, I don't have any water, tayammum. If, for example, I don't have any clothing, there is a way to pray. If, for example, I don't know where the qibla is, I try my best, etc. Then he says, وَلْيَكُنْ رَأْسُهُ عَلَى اسْتِوَاءِ الْقِيَامِ. And when praying, his head should be in line with his back, like he should stand straight, or she should stand straight. وَإِنْ شَاءَ أَطْرَقَ. And if he wants or she wants to, then the person can lower their head slightly. So lower the head slightly. He says, وَالْإِطْرَاقُ أَقْرَبُ لِلْخُشُوعِ. And to lower one's head is closer to khushu', to being in a state of concentration and humility toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But of course within reason. It doesn't mean that a person lowers their whole back, but they simply lower their head slightly. Why? They're looking at the ground. وَلْيَكُنْ وَأَغَضُّ لِلْبَصَرِ. And likewise, it's better for one's basar. If you're standing up straight and you're looking around, you're looking everywhere, left, right, and looking at what people are wearing, etc. But when you're looking at the ground, you're not going to be looking around. You're going to be concentrating, etc. He says, وَلْيَكُنْ بَصْرُهُ مَحْصُورًا عَلَى مُصَلَّاهِ الَّذِي يُصَلِّي عَلَيْهِ. And the person who is praying, they should restrict their sight to their musalla. And the musalla is the place that you're praying upon or within. So in the masjid, your particular place of prayer, that's where you should restrict your sight to. Then he says, وَلْيَقْرُبْ مِنْ جِدَارِ الْحَائِطِ فإن ذلك يقصر مسافة البصر ويمنع تفرق الفكر وليدم على هذا القيام كذلك إلى الركوع من غير التفات. He says, and the person, if possible, should pray as close to the wall as possible, or as close to the sutra as possible. Why? Because it restricts the amount of space that the person has to look around. And this perhaps when an imam or when praying alone, it can be applied. But as for when you're praying in jama'ah, it doesn't mean that you should find a wall and pray close to the wall. No, you find the closest, the first row on the right, etc., and you fill up the rows accordingly. But if possible, pray closer to a wall or closer to a sutra, if possible. And then he says, likewise, وَيَمْنَعُ تَفَرُّقَ الْفِكْرِ, and it restricts a person from contemplating and thinking a lot, etc. And we already mentioned previously, if a person can come to the salah early, i.e., if they can be in the masjid 15 minutes before the iqamah, i.e., when the adhan goes off, then it's better. Why? Because it allows the fan of the dunya in your head to come to a stop. And the most important thing to try to restrict yourself from doing is using your phone. Try to restrict the usage of your phone whilst in the masjid. Don't be set like, what's the point in coming to the masjid, a place that is meant to be cut off from the dunya, and you're engaged in dunya? You're sending messages to people, you're talking to people about dunya, you're reading the news, you're doing things like that. No, try to restrict yourself whilst in the masjid, whilst in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Restrict yourself to that which concerns Allah. Restrict yourself to that which concerns Allah. If you were to go to someone's house and you're sitting on the couch, for example, or sofa, etc., and you're engaged in talking to other people and strictly business on your phone, it's going to be considered rude. You would be considered a rude person, even though it's a practice of many, unfortunately. You find they're sitting with people and they're sending messages. And they'll say, no, it's an important message, I can't leave the person waiting. There's someone right in front of you. That's rude. So in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is no exception. So when we're in the house of Allah, we should try to keep our mobile phones, the usage of our mobile phones restricted. And if you know you can't do that, then leave your phone maybe in the glove box of your car, leave it at home, buy a phone, a £10 phone that you bring to the masjid, for example, for emergency. If you cannot have control over yourself, then restrict yourself. If you cannot control yourself, restrict yourself. And you'll see that the salah will be much better. You'll have more concentration, you'll have more time. In 15 minutes between the adhan and the iqamah, you can memorize maybe half a page of the Quran, a third of a page of the Quran, a line of the Quran, if you're not used to memorizing. For some, they could even memorize a page. You can read in 15 minutes, you can read half a chapter of the Quran. If you're proficient in reading, in 15 minutes, you can read half a chapter. So that you can utilize your time in the masjid if you restrict your dunya and you keep your dunya outside of the masjid. And so it's a good practice. And we said before that a practice of the awliya and the ulama of the past, and currently you'll find in Muslim countries it's still a practice, spending that which is between Maghrib and Isha in the masjid. And so in the summer, for example, when Maghrib and Isha are close together, try it. Come to the masjid and stay in the masjid between Maghrib and Isha and use that time only for Quran, dhikr, reading, etc. And you will see that it makes a major difference. You can get so much done. Then and you'll meet people, the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi, that a person is upon the religion of his khalil. If you want to have good people, look for them in good places. If you want to be surrounded by good people, find them in good places. If you are in the masjid, good people come to the masjid, generally speaking. Good people come to the masjid and you will make good friends in the masjid. If you meet for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, that will be a relationship which benefits for the rest of your life, of our lives. Then he says, وَلْيَدُمْ عَلَى هَذَا الْقِيَامِ كَذَلِكَ إِلَى الرُّكُوعِ مِنْ غَيْرِ اتِّفَاتٍ. So he should remain in such a state, staring at his musalla, cutting himself off mentally from the dunya, standing up straight with his neck slightly lowered for the duration of his qiyam without turning left and right. And if a person turns left and right with the neck, it doesn't necessarily invalidate the salah, but if they turn with their torso, that invalidates the salah. And something which sometimes can be seen in the masjid is a person might bend over to roll up their trouser leg in the salah. That invalidates the salah because you've added now something to the qiyam which is not from the qiyam. Or for example, they might lift their leg to scratch it, or they might do something else. We have to be very careful in the salah. The salah, there are regulations. There are regulations for the salah. And when we're in prayer, we should try our best to be in prayer as if we're standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, literally. And he says, هذا أدب القيام ثم ليحضر النية بقلبه ثم ليرفع يديه إلى حذو منكبيه. So when he's standing now, he's standing now to start the prayer, he says he should try to summon the intention with his heart. He should try to reflect over the intention with his heart. And this is important. And this is why some of the fuqaha, such as the Shafi'iyya, they will recommend that a person verbalizes their intention. What's the point in verbalizing the intention? So that it can be present in the heart. And it's not to say that a person should necessarily do that, but that's one of the reasons why the fuqaha, they recommend that a person verbalizes the intention. Why? To bring the intention to mind. Because sometimes we fall into a state of ghafla. You can Allahu Akbar and the prayer is ended and you don't even know that you prayed. It's gone so fast and you don't even realize that you've prayed. So it's important to try to be conscious in the salah. So how should I be conscious? We've mentioned it before, I believe. Who am I praying for and what am I praying? Who am I praying for and what am I praying? So I should be conscious. I'm praying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and I'm praying dhuhr. I'm praying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm praying asr. And I'm not saying necessarily that a person should verbalize. I'm mentioning the reasoning behind the verbalization according to some of the fuqaha, such as the Shafi'iyya. And likewise, some of the fuqaha, the Ahnaf, for example, they will have something which is like a tanbih between the adhan and the iqama, where certain adhkar are recited between the adhan and the iqama. Why? To remind people of the salah. And they'll say, because we live in a time of ghafla. We live in a time where people have fallen into a state of ghafla. They are aloof from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and practicing Islam. And so they need to be reminded. And so reminding ourselves before prayer, I'm praying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and I'm praying dhuhr or asr. How does a person build up concentration? By starting at the very bottom. Starting at the very bottom. My aim for this prayer is to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at least once in every rak'ah. If I do that, alhamdulillah. Next time, try to increase it. Try to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 2 or 3 times. The next time, increase it 4 or 5 times. The next time, increase it. I want to try to focus on Allah for an entire rak'ah and then increase it until my entire salah, I've got some concentration. Then he says, ثُمَّ لَيَرْفَعْ يَدَيْهِ إِلَى حَذْوِ مِنْ كَبَيْهِ. So once a person has the intention, he should raise his hands to either his shoulders or his earlobes. And then he says, وَإِذَا اسْتَقَرَّتِ الْيَدَانِ فِي مَقَرِّهِمَا ابْتَدَأَ التَّكْبِيرُ. So he starts like that and Allahu Akbar. And there are different approaches. Some of the fuqaha, they'll say, you say Allahu Akbar and you lower your hand at the same time, etc. We're not going to go into the details. Then he says, مَعَ إِرْسَالِهِمَا وَإِحْضَارِ النِّيَّةِ. وإذا استقرت اليدان في مقرهما ابتدأ التكبير مع إرسالهما وإحضار النية. So he will say, Allahu Akbar, and then he leaves them to the side, and then he goes on to say, ثم ليضع اليدين على ما فوق السرة وتحت الصدر ويضع اليمنى على اليسرى. So he'll start Allahu Akbar, and then he places his hands on the he says ما فوق الصدر ما فوق السرة وتحت الصدر. That's the Shafi'i opinion. The Shafi'i approach is that the hands are to be placed beneath the sadr, the chest, but above the navel area, so above the belly button. So which is around here. Around here. The Ahnaf, they say it's on the navel or just below the navel. The Hanabila likewise on the navel or just below the navel. So the belly button or lower, according to the Ahnaf and the Hanabila. And likewise the Malikiyya. The Malikiyya, they say on the side or like the Ahnaf and the Hanabila here. The Shafi'iyya, they say here. None of the 4 schools of fiqh say that the hand should be placed here. None of the 4 schools of fiqh. That's not a classic opinion in Islam, that the hand should be placed here. And it's some take it to an extreme and the hands are placed up here. It's not natural. According to the Imam al-Shafi'i, the hands are placed here, Imam Abu Hanifa here, Imam Ahmed here, and Imam Malik here, if not on the side. And Al-Mullah Ali Qari, he mentions that when a person is raising the hands to say Allahu Akbar, they should imagine that they are lifting the veil between themselves and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or they are saying, salam to the dunya. They're putting the dunya behind them. Now I'm standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he says, وَيَضَعُ الْيُمْنَى عَلَى الْيُسْرَى, and the right hand should be placed upon the left hand. The right on top of the left. And some of the fuqaha, they'll detail how do you hold. They'll say, the thumb hold with the little finger wrapped around, 3 fingers on top. Some will say right hand on top of the left hand, etc. However you feel comfortable, basically. However your the natural position that your hands take in whilst you're praying. And remember, these differences of opinion, because you have some young-minded or old old and young-minded or young individuals who will say, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli." This is the correct way, etc. This is the way of the Salaf. And like, if you are saying that, you're claiming that you've seen the Prophet ﷺ pray. If you're saying, no, Imam Abu Hanifa is wrong, Imam Ahmad is wrong, Imam Malik is wrong, Imam Shafi'i is wrong, and the correct way is the way of my Shaykh, Fulan ibn Fulan, who knows how to authenticate hadith, and he has come to this conclusion based upon his vigorous research. Did he see the Prophet ﷺ pray? He didn't. And so it's his opinion. And if you weigh his opinion in the scales, the opinions of Imam Ahmad, Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, and Imam Shafi'i are far heavier and far greater. And so reality is you're blind following a contemporary scholar over blind following the great scholars of Islam who gave birth to contemporary scholars and contemporary scholarship. And these issues are not issues to be debated. Like you will find some individuals debating and arguing about whether you put your hands first or knees first. Where do you place the hand in salah? Do you raise your hands? Don't raise your hands. Is the basmala from Fatiha or not from Fatiha? These issues have been discussed. They're done and they have been rubber stamped by the four schools of fiqh. Those differences of opinion are all valid. They all come from the Quran and the Sunnah. And the salah was not obligated upon us for us to argue about things like this. The salah was obligated upon us for us to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whichever madhab you choose, it's the correct madhab, bi'idhnillah. And it's important that a person, as we mentioned before a few times, I believe, it's important that a person studies a madhab. It's crucial that a person studies a madhab. Worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with understanding. When you study a madhab, you will have a basic framework. And realize when you study the madhab, initially, you are not studying the madhab because you are a scholar. You're not studying the madhab so that now you can go and tell people what's right and wrong and argue with people. You're studying a madhab to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's it, full stop. So you shouldn't be studying your madhab, going to the masjid and saying, oh, subhanAllah, you're not praying according to the sunnah. How do you know? In this particular book. That's incorrect. But you should study a madhab to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are many small books that are taught in the various madhahib that you can study, etc., for the purpose of worshipping Allah with knowledge based upon the way of the Salaf as formulated by the four schools of fiqh. That's the purpose of studying a madhab. And as we mentioned, this is the madhab of Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah. So if you choose to follow the Shafi'i madhab, alhamdulillah. So he says, القراءة ثم يبتدئ بدعاء الاستفتاح وحسن أن يقول الله أكبر كبيرا والحمد لله كثيرا وسبحان الله بكرة وأصيلا. So now he mentions after the person has commenced with Allahu Akbar, the takbir, and he's placed his right hand on his left hand, that he should initiate the dua al-istiftah. And he mentioned that it's agreeable to say Allahu Akbar kabira walhamdulillahi kathira wa subhanallahi bukratan wa asila أو وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا وما أنا من المشركين إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين لا شريك له وبذلك أمرت وأنا أول المسلمين. أو يقول سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وتبارك اسمك وتعالى جدك وجل ثناؤك ولا إله غيرك. So he mentions various ad'iyah, which you can find in various books, etc. The most important thing is to pick a dua al-istiftah, and to recite it before the ta'awudh, the a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, and before the basmala, which we'll come to shortly, inshallah. ثم يقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. So then he moves on to the ta'awudh. Some of the fuqaha, they mention that the ta'awudh is for the qira'ah. So if there is no qira'ah, there's no ta'awudh. So if, and some of the fuqaha, they'll say, no, the ta'awudh is for the salah. It's for the salah. So even if you're not reciting, you'll still say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. When would that be relevant? When would this issue be relevant? Whether the ta'awudh is for qira'ah or for the salah? How would that be relevant to a person? Jama'ah. So if I'm coming for Maghrib salah, I'm not going to be reading any Quran necessarily. So if we take the opinion that the ta'awudh is only for the qira'ah, then I wouldn't recite the ta'awudh myself. But if we say, no, the ta'awudh is for the salah itself, then regardless of the imam reciting, I would recite the ta'awudh. Then he says, ثم يقرأ الفاتحة ويبتدئ فيها ببسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. He he says بِتَمَامِ تَشْدِيدَاتِهَا وَحُرُوفِهَا. So he then starts, after the ta'awudh, he starts with Surah Al-Fatiha. And he mentions Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the Basmala. And the Shafi'iyah, they take the opinion that the Basmala is from Surah Al-Fatiha. So if you start with Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, you have not actually recited Surah Al-Fatiha, because they have the opinion that the Basmala is from the actual Surah Al-Fatiha. And he says بِتَمَامِ تَشْدِيدَاتِهَا وَحُرُوفِهَا. And so this is a very important part. He says that when the person recites Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, etc., he has to recite it with completeness, i.e. the tashdidat and the correct pronunciation of the huruf, the letters, to the best of one's ability. And this is something where many of us are severely lacking. And we are not excused in this issue, unfortunately. There is no excuse. There's no soft way to go about it. Why? Today, you can pay a qualified scholar of Quran to teach you how to recite Quran in the comfort of your own home. And most people can afford it, because they're living in countries where they would accept. Does anyone here study with anyone online? In Egypt? How much does he charge? A he, yeah? Not a she. £4.50. 1.5. £4.15 per hour. So £4.15 per hour. And if you were to just pay, if you were to take 4 hours a month just to work on your Fatiha, that should be sufficient just to work on Fatiha. And £4, someone will say, oh, I can't afford to pay £4.15 for a Quran lesson. But they'll easily go outside and buy a meal for £4.15, £4.50. They'll go and buy a pair of trainers, etc. Buy an item of clothing. What's more important? It's not like we don't have clothes. It's not like we don't have food. £4. If anyone suggests that they cannot afford to pay £4.15, I would be shocked. Save £1 a month. And in 4 months' time, pay for an hour of the Quran. Most people in the UK can afford. Most people. Perhaps only, extreme circumstances. And even if that's the case, borrow the money. Borrow £20. Ask someone to lend you £20 so that you can pay for a month's worth of Quran lessons. It might be harsh, but that's because it's a severe situation. We don't have an excuse in this. And to be honest, you don't even have to pay someone. Go to most masajid and they will have Quran halaqat. They will have Quran teachers available who teach for free. If they themselves don't have the time, they'll ask one of their students. They'll assign a young student to teach. And so it's very important. Surah Al-Fatiha is the most important surah in the Quran because I recite it in all of my prayers. And if the prayer is not accepted, none of my actions are going to be accepted. So I should not afford myself any excuse. Most of us, when we want a career, we take the time to qualify ourselves in that particular area. And if we want something, we find the time for it. But the Quran, we don't find the time. And a person does not have an excuse when it comes to the Surah Al-Fatiha in our time today. There's no excuse. If you can't afford to pay, you don't live near a masjid, subhanallah, YouTube. You turn on YouTube, type, learn Surah Al-Fatiha. Many options will come up, various languages. If you have an Android phone, download Quran Android. You have an iPhone, download iQuran or something. I don't have an iPhone, so it's free. And if you don't have Wi-Fi, go to a coffee shop. There are no excuses when it comes to the Quran. The only excuse a person has when it comes to the Quran is that which they are unable to pronounce due to their tongue. For example, they may struggle with certain letters. That will take a lifetime, perhaps. It will take a few years, and ad-dad and so on and so forth. That's normal. For some, ar-ra, etc. But as for the tashdidat, etc., there is no excuse. So every person should take it upon themselves to rectify their recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. They should not allow themselves the excuse of not being able to recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Then he says, ويجهر بالقراءة في الصبح والمغرب والعشاء إلا أن يكون مأموما ويجهر بالتأمين ثم يقرأ السورة أو قدر 3 آيات من القرآن فما فوقها. So then he speaks about the method of recitation. So in Fajr, or he says Subh and Maghrib and Isha, a person will recite loudly. And in Dhuhr and in Asr, they will recite quietly. And in the Nawafil prayers of the day, they will recite quietly. In the Nawafil prayers of the night, they have the option to recite loudly or quietly. They have the option. And if you're reciting quietly in the masjid, please do keep it quiet. Because reciting quietly in the masjid is not reciting, it's like just one level below reciting loudly. You're whispering, but you're one level below reciting loudly so that other people around you can't concentrate. No, recite. Only you should be able to hear yourself. If the entire masjid can hear you when you're reciting, that's not quietly, that's loudly. Maybe some people, they don't realize they're doing it, but it's important to bring attention to it. And he says a person should recite a surah or that which is equivalent to 3 verses of the Quran. 3 short verses of the Quran, for example. And if the person is a ma'moom, so the ma'moom is the one who's praying behind the imam, then they don't recite loudly. And according to the Shafi'iyya, Fatiha is wajib even upon the ma'moom. According to the Ahnaf and the Hanabila, the Fatiha is not wajib upon the ma'moom. The Fatiha of the imam is enough, is sufficient. And so if you're praying behind the imam and you don't have time to recite Fatiha, you don't need to worry about it. Why? Because the imam's Fatiha suffices you of Fatiha. And then he goes on to al-ruku' wa lawahiquhu. So we'll conclude with that, inshallah. We'll stop there. And we'll continue next week with the ruku' and probably the sujood and the tashahhud, bi-iznillah.